So welcome, Baz Ward, a driver in the JCW MINI Championship. Thank you very much for coming on the show and getting involved. But how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and thanks for having me on.
No worries at all. It's great that you've come on the show, as I said, and it'll be good to have a chat about your racing career to date and obviously what you've got planned for this season. It's set to be a very exciting one. But I'll start as I always do with my guests on my interview show and ask, how did you first become interested in motorsports?
Oh, well, here's the ever long question. So, always liked motorsport since I was a kid. I think one of my earliest memories will be going around to my uncle's, and Formula One would always be on a Sunday. And it's kind of just sit there and watch that. And then as you grow up, it's like, well, I can watch it on my own now. And the very first time I ever actually went to a racetrack, I think I was maybe 11 or 12. I took, there was a race meeting at my local track, which at the time used to be Lydden Hill. So I'm from Kent originally.
Right.
So
Okay.
Lydden Hill was maybe 20 minutes away from where I lived. And I got my mum to, well, I say got my mum to, probably like dragged her along, but she had to drive me and my little brother there. And I just remember having the best day out. And that's kind of what started the whole thing, really, my little obsession with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's funny how you sort of get into it, and everyone's sort of got a different story on how they got involved, and it often does sort of center around Formula One on the telly, and obviously there's plenty of great circuits around spread around the UK, and there's always one fairly close to you. So I imagine that was a place you spent quite a lot of time as then time developed, and you got more into the sport.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we didn't used to spend too much time there because I think as we got a little bit older, sort of got more into it and started following different stuff. Because I still remember touring cars being on the telly back in the early '90s and what the heyday of super touring. Like that's what really kind of captured my attention with the racing. And again, so dragged my poor old mum off to Brands Hatch because we wanted to go and watch the racing and stuff for a day out. But my route into motorsports probably not quite the conventional one compared to most people these days. I didn't do a lot of karting as a kid. And the route I took was a little bit different. I think the very first time I ever drove a go kart, I was about 13 years old. So the school I used to go to was like quite heavily within like the farming community. It was in the middle of nowhere. And one of my best mates at school, his dad used to breed chickens for
Right.
Sainsbury's.
Okay.
I feel like I'm going to go off on a tangent here.
Yeah.
But basically, you used to go over to his at the weekends, and he had little go karts and little motorbikes, and we just like raced them around the access roads, around all the chicken coops and stuff. And that was the first time I ever drove one. And then the school used to do little trips to Buckmore Park because that was
Yeah.
probably the closest kart track. And then it wasn't until I was 19 that I actually started racing karts properly. So always wanted to be involved in motorsport and not naive enough to think, well, I'm going to be a professional driver and what's the backup plan? I'm like, well, if I can't drive them, I want to work on them.
Mhm.
So I went to Canterbury College and studied to be a mechanic. So I'm a mechanic by trade in theory, although I don't really like doing it too much. I get my hands dirty. Um, so the plan was kind of going through the motorsport route. And it was whilst I was studying at Canterbury College, they had maybe three pro karts. And we used to race them at Bayford Meadows in Sittingbourne, and that was how I first started racing.
Oh, amazing. Well, I wasn't expecting that when you started saying about the chicken farm and stuff. I was like, I've never
I
heard
know.
it. But you know what? It's such a great way to start. And everyone gets into it in a different way. And it's brought you here, which is such a good thing. And I think it does prove that for anyone watching that does want to get into motorsport or be a driver, they don't have to be karting from such a young age. Because I was talking on a recent interview, and of recent years, karting is at such a high standard, and there's drivers who are really young getting into it, and it's so much more difficult now, I'd say, where compared to how it has been.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. If you're in the fortunate position to maybe have family that have raced, or maybe a family some like money is always going to be the ultimate factor in this thing. So if you're in a fortunate position enough that you can afford to do it, the world's your oyster. Really, you can go and do it. But I like to think that I'm kind of an example of how you can do things. I'm from a very modest family. Growing up, my mum used to run a call centre for Stena Line ferries. My dad was a carpenter, and no one in my family had anything to do with motorsport. So everything I've done has just been something that I wanted to do, and just had to put hard work into it to achieve it.
Yeah, yeah, no, very much so. And I love stories like that because, like I said, there's so many cases where drivers start at a really young age and go to karting and then Janetta Juniors, which they're great ways of getting into the sport. But for so many, it's not
Yeah,
possible. and sort of that is the thing with motorsport. It is very difficult to sort of get involved with. But obviously, so you started in karting. Um, how would you sum up your time in karting? Because you learn a lot in that period, don't you?
You do. So all the karting I did was pro karting, which for anyone who's not massively familiar with it, is the kind of stuff you can go and do at your local circuit in the high, like a high kart sort of stuff. Twin engine, four stroke, not massively fast, but just fast enough to have a little bit more power than grip, and they're a lot of fun. You can learn a lot about them because unlike two strokes like Rotax or Iami as it is now, um, it's all about momentum and carrying speed. So it's a slightly different approach to the kind of point, squirt, go kind of thing, the faster stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously lots of battles on the way because karting, it's such a pure form of motorsport. You get some great battles and it's where you learn your racecraft really, isn't it? As well as
Oh,
setting good
100%.
lap
Yeah.
times. So it's
The thing is, it's what sets karting different from cars is it's by nature quite simple in terms of, in theory, I know it's always in theory, but everything's the same. So it comes down to you as the driver. You don't have endless amounts of things you can change in the setup. It comes down mostly to how you drive it. And it's you against everyone else in that exact same situation. You can't often turn around and go, well, he's got this and they've got that. I mean, it does happen, but at the low levels of karting, it's quite by nature down to the driver.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I can sort of picture it, the karting now at this point sort of taking over and becoming such a big, part of your life. When would you say it sort of dawned on you that you wanted to make this like, a big part of your career and what you wanted to do in the future?
Um, I think I was probably late teens. So whilst I was studying at college, we had to get a part-time job. And me being typically me, just getting a job in the local garage for one day a week, my work experience wasn't really good enough. So I ended up actually applying to Palmer Sport at Bedford, where they
Mhm.
used to run the Formula Palmer Audi series.
Yeah,
And I ended up becoming what was fondly referred to as a weekend warrior. So I'd be a mechanic, so a number two mechanic. You go along just for the weekends, and you'd run a car, and I did that for the season. So whilst other people sort of got a day off in the week to go and do their work placement, I just had a normal day off. But I'd go away Saturday, Sunday, sometimes on Friday, um, and I'd be off going around the country traveling with a race team. That was kind of my work experience for college, which was
yeah,
completely different to what everyone else was doing. And it was only then it was like, this is quite cool actually. So okay, I'm racing karts. It'd be nice to go further, but when you sort of look at it and you get into it and you realize how expensive things are and how it's kind of difficult, then I was like, well, I like going away at the weekends. I like working on the cars. I like being in this environment. And it's just kind of then it's just like, yeah, this is pretty cool.
yeah,
Um, and it's kind of off the back of that where the next part of my career really started. So it was working with the former Palmer Audi lot, where I realised that at Bedford they've got a corporate venue. At the Bedford Autodrome, they've got a big test track, they've got a corporate driving experience, um, and it was only going up there was there were a few times where they might ask you to go into the workshops during the week to help with prep. Not very often, but if they were busy or a short turnaround between races, you'd get asked to go in. And it was on one of those occasions, the first time I went in, I was like, you've got all these cars. What's all this about? And it's kind of like you learn that they do these corporate driving experiences. Um, and just one day they were looking for instructors, and I was like, well, I'd like to have a go. Can I give it a go? I race. Okay, it's only karts, so I've got some experience, but nothing really with cars, other than a few track days that I'd started doing with a friend. Um, and then yeah, got a job there instructing back in 2005. And here I am now, into my 18th season with them. So I've started off as just this fresh faced kid that kind of
yeah.
didn't have an awful lot of experience other than maybe 3 or 4 years of karting, some track days. And now I'm sitting now as a senior instructor up there, quite fairly well in. And now I'm a for for want of a better phrase, I'm a proper racing driver as such.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, there's plenty of I'd like to ask about, obviously, the instructing side of things. But just before that, it's funny you say sort of the sort of the craziness sort of different things and how opportunities lead on to other things. But because I think because motorsport's quite a unique sport. A lot of my friends, they do football or other things like that. But it's such a motorsport is so unique and it takes you all over the place, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very niche. It's very niche. So before I really got into any sort of motorsport, rugby was always
Yeah.
my main passion. Like I've been a qualified rugby coach. I've coached university women's rugby teams. So it's kind of it's just a weird direction that my path has kind of ended up in. So I think the coaching side of the racing with the instructing and things like that, it all comes quite naturally, just to sort
Yeah.
of be able to explain to how things are done and how I do it and how you do it. And it's it's very varied. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But obviously, your role is now obviously instructing and that sort of thing. That must be really cool and very rewarding because it's a very important role within the industry that perhaps sort of gets overshadowed a little bit by the main driving, which is arguably sort of the more exciting bit that you're sort of you're doing in the minis, but a really important job nonetheless.
Yeah, it is. It's really important, and it's surprising to how much you can learn from instructing and coaching as well. Because you'll sit next to people and they'll do some of the craziest, strangest things. Not deliberately. It's just they just don't know any better.
Yeah,
So, despite your best efforts trying to get them to do things how you want them to, sometimes they'll do something just completely ad hoc on their own, and you'll see it work, and you'll be like, "That was I don't know how you got away with that." And then it makes you assess kind of what sort of things are possible. You see some wild things that you'd
yeah,
never try in your wildest imaginations, but somehow they come off. So there's actually quite a lot you can learn from instructing as well, because it's always I think we're always our own worst critics when it comes to driving, especially if you don't have a a good weekend or a bad session or etc. So you're always kind of looking back at yourself. But when you spend your days looking at how other people drive and kind of critiquing them, it makes you very aware of the things you need to be looking out for.
yeah. I imagine you've got to be quite brave, I guess, being an instructor because you're not the one in control of the car, I guess. So I imagine that's at times can be quite daunting.
Yeah, well, luckily these days, most places you work at, especially the higher end stuff, all the cars kind of have dual controls.
Right. Okay.
So you get to a point where you will do enough laps yourself in something that I need to brake here because if I don't, we're not making the corner.
Yeah.
You know the racing lines with your eyes shut, and all you're trying to do is just get your guest or your client up to that point. And actually, the closer you get to it, the easier your job becomes because for the most part, if they're doing it kind of how I would do it, I can just sit back a little bit and
Yeah.
just give them the little tweaks. It's the ones that are very nervous, very cautious. They're the ones that require the most work because you've got to get so much out of them, especially sometimes the sessions or what we do, you don't always have an awful lot of time with them. So you're trying to get the absolute maximum out of them in the shortest time possible. And a lot of it is just instilling confidence more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So obviously a great opportunity for you, obviously doing that. But I imagine in the back of your mind, it's always been you've wanted to race, a high level in cars. But as we've discussed, that is a difficult thing to achieve. How did you first sort of get into car racing yourself?
Um, it's sometimes it's one of those things. It's who you know, not what you know.
Hmm.
And most of the racing I've done has been through people that I've met in the industry. So my very first car race was in 2014 at the BRSCC Championship Finals weekend when I drove one of Brian Chandler's Mazda MX-5 Mark Ones.
Yeah.
So at that time, I was living with Abby Eaton, who was racing in the Mark III Championship and won it that year. I was like, I quite fancy having a little go. And Brian was like, well, I've got a car. We've just built one. It's like the engine's just the standard road engine, but the car needs a bit of mileage on it. He went, and if you want to have a go, I'll do you a bit of a deal on it. I was like, all
Yeah.
right, fair enough. So jump in it and have a little go. And it was just such a good fun weekend. And it just
Yeah.
showed you like not all motorsport has to be massively expensive. I think the thing is obviously how social media works and how the world sees things. There's a lot of really, really good club events where you can have a lot of fun racing,
Mhm.
but they're just not well known about, because it's not like touring cars where it's on ITV. It's not like F1 where it's got its own channel. A lot of the races these days they're so much better now because obviously the weekends are broadcast usually on YouTube and things like that. So people can watch them and get a bit more involved and follow them. But going back in 20 years or so, this stuff just didn't really happen. So it was like you'd have all these race weekends and race meetings happening all across the country, and no one really knew about them. But now I think it's a lot easier to get involved at a lower level and have a lot of fun and not spend millions of pounds doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I completely agree with that. I live a few miles from Snetterton, so I have a season pass there. So I'm up at,
Okay.
pretty much every event. And there's some great, club championships. But like you say, a lot of them, it's got so much better in recent years, like you say, from out because they just don't hear about them because they don't have the same level of traction as Formula One and BTCC. But there's some great racing out there, and there's always a good atmosphere, especially in the club racing paddocks, which is, I imagine, a great thing to be involved with.
Yeah, massively. I mean, before the all the mini stuff came around, I've been racing in the Enduro KA series. So that's run through MSBR. It's for Ford KAs, and it always sounds quite funny when you describe it to people because like, there's this race series for Ford KAs. They're like, yeah, and there's a lot of them. They're getting grids of 30, 40 cars
Yeah.
sometimes, and the cars are all exactly the same, but they get some really good names of people come through and drive them.
Hmm.
Um, so for what is a clubby event, it's really popular and it's probably one of the most fun I've ever had because you've got a car that's not very quick, it hasn't got a lot of grip, it moves around a lot. And if anyone's ever raced a cadet go kart or ever seen a cadet go kart, which is the little go karts that the really young kids start in, this is like the adult equivalent of it. These things go around nose to tail for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. Um, and some of the guys that are racing it is just you get some decent names in there. Nick Tandy's been in it.
Hmm.
We've had loads of mini guys have come in the past. It's it's just a lot of fun, and you don't spend a lot of money. So I did it with two of my friends, so Martin and Adam Smith, who have both raced at a really decent level. And they were like, well, we want to get back into racing and not spend a lot of money and have some fun with it. So Martin built up this Ford KA and was like, all right, we'll give it a go. And honestly, I've never driven something that's so slow and so terrifying to drive.
Really?
Like, it's just because it's not very quick. So
Yeah.
to try and make it go fast, you have to do some stuff that just doesn't seem natural. Because so at Brands Hatch, to give you an example, you enter Paddock Hill Bend absolutely flat, which is
Yeah.
only about 80 miles an hour in this thing. But if you can, where the truck gate is, there's a little access road just to the
Yeah.
left in the way into Paddock.
Hmm.
Just as you get into there, you come off the throttle, you kind of look at the brake a little bit, turn in and floor it. And you can do that every lap, but
Oh
every lap the
my.
car will do something different and it'll be
Yeah.
moving around. And you're trying to do this while 30 other nutters are trying to do the exact same thing. And then
Yeah.
it gets dark and it's just like, this is just insane. Because anything else I've ever driven around Brands Hatch requires you to almost brake, somewhere back near where the pit lane is.
Yeah.
So to go into it that deep on the power, even though it's slow, just seems really weird.
Yeah.
It's really strange.
Yeah.
It's the same at Donington Park. You go around Coppice and it's flat. And you're like, nothing I've ever driven around here has ever been flat at this point. Like, oh, it's all right actually.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, Paddock Hill Bend's pretty daunting at the best of times, in my opinion. So to be doing that in, a race scenario and cars all around you, because like you say, the grids are massive. And I think some people perhaps look down a little bit on single make championships. But it's so much down to A, the engineers getting a good setup on the car, and B, obviously driver talent, because obviously you're being all in the same machinery. It's going to be close, and like you say, it provides great racing.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the good part of it is the money side of it. You can. I think the first. So we've had two cars. I think there's a third. I think Martin actually started building a third one. But our very first car, the donor car itself was 750 quid. You spent about £2,000 on it. All the roll cage, safety, all the safety kit, and then you can change things like bushes so that everyone's running the same thing. But for less than 3 grand, you've got this little race car, and
Yeah.
they're pretty bulletproof. Not much really goes wrong with them, and you just run it, and it's like it's just really good. Because you can get 2, 3, 4 mates all club in, and it's sort of thing where it doesn't need a whole team to look after it. It doesn't need loads of maintenance in between races. For the most part, it's a case of you clean it, fuel it, and run it. It's really good, but it also just shows how competitive people are. We've got guys that have won GT races, guys that have won Formula Renault races, F3 races. You've got guys like Nick Tandy who's won Le Mans, and then you've just got some guy who's been sitting in an office all week who's just turned up
Yeah.
with two of his mates and haven't really raced. And then you get all of us and we're just battling for like 4 or 5 hours. And it's just like, this is just, you can't get this anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the price for that sort of thing is fantastic, and I think even more so due to the fact you guys do endurance races in it, because that's not something that every race series offers, and it's such a unique style of racing, isn't it? You've got to
Yeah,
drive slightly differently, and there's lots of fun along the way as well as challenges, I'm sure.
yeah, there is. I mean, we always have a bit of a laugh because Adam, one of the teammates, he likes to be the hero in the team. You know, he was. I mean, to be fair, he is the fastest out of the three of us whenever we've done it. But he likes to have that little ego boost of, I got some pole or I got the fastest lap. And then, in endurance racing, none of those things really matter. You know,
Mhm.
it's okay. It's always nice to start at the front, but ultimately, if you've got a 5, 6, 12 hour race, it means very little because so much can happen.
Yeah,
It's that consistency about how you can pass through traffic. I mean, sometimes, your average race pace in those things is 2 seconds slower than what's capable of doing, but you've got no other choice. It just is what it is. You just got to
yeah,
try and make sure you average a better lap time than anyone else.
yeah.
But to show you how you can throw a spanner in the works, it's been 2 or 3 years ago now. We had the final at Brands Hatch, and Adam had started the race. He'd led like the first 45 minutes, and we just telling it was quite wet. So we're like, just relax. You're pulling away. Pace is nice. Next thing you know, on the button, boys, I'm in the gravel paddock. We're like,
Oh no.
oh no. So not only did he get stuck in the gravel for 2 laps, you get a penalty if you get towed out of the gravel for a lap.
Yeah.
And it took him a lap to get back round to the pit. So 45 minutes into the race, we were leading with like a 20-second gap. By the end of the first hour, we were last and 4 laps down. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, what do we do? What do we do? So we're like, well, it's a long race. So at the final race of Brands Hatch, they call it the IndyCar 500. So
Yeah.
Indy because it's
Yeah.
the Indy circuit,
It's very
car as
clever.
in KA the car, and it's a 500-minute race, which is eight over 8 hours. It's a long race.
Mm.
So we're like, oh, I don't know, do we even bother at this point? Whatever. And Martin had his daughters there that day, and she properly gave us the guilt trip. She was like, "Daddy, you can't just pack up just because you're not winning." And we all just stood there. We're like, "Oh, okay, she's kind of got a point, hasn't she?" So we battled on and we kept racing around. And then as the hours ticked off, we just kept going higher and higher and higher and higher. And then as we're coming into the final hour of the race, we're in the shout of getting a podium here. We're
Oh
like,
my
this is
days.
this is some comeback and a half. So we get into the final hour and we're like, right, let's just keep going. We'll plod along. If we can get a podium out of this, we've had a right result. And then it gets into like the final 15 minutes of the race. And there's a safety car period. So someone had crashed. The safety car comes out. Next thing you know, safety car comes in and goes straight back out again because the leader's broken down on the track behind the safety car.
Right. Okay.
So they break down. Safety car goes round. Another couple of laps later, we've now overtaken them. Now we're second. We're second and we're on the lead lap, and we're like 10. We're only about 30 seconds behind the leader. Leader makes a final pit stop, and we run these things called hue tags.
Mhm.
So when you go out the pits, it's like a big scanning box, and basically you swipe your wristband against
Yeah.
it, and it knows who's driving the car. They came in for their final pit stop and didn't tag out, so they had to come through for a drive-through. They had a drive-through penalty.
Yeah.
As they got their drive-through penalty, we crossed the line to take the lead. 90 seconds later, we won it with a puncture. It's like, how's that
Oh
happen?
my days. What a roller
It's like,
coaster of a race for you guys. I mean, I know, like you say, 8 hours
especially,
is a long time, but even still, that's a lot of ups and downs for you guys. And especially, you were considering not even continuing. You must have been,
yeah, 6 hours before we were going to put it in the truck and go home.
yeah. Oh my days. Well, I wasn't expecting that. I was thinking, they might, climb back a few places, but to then go on and win it with a puncture
Yeah.
on the end, I think we can't
Oh yeah,
can't
we got
ignore
punched
that
on the
little
final lap, and it's just
little
like, oh god,
yeah.
the car looked like it done stage of the RAC rally. To be honest, it was
Oh
a
really?
right state.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. And obviously with races that long, you've got to be quite strong, keeping awake, and you've got to plan different stints, and you all being well creating a strategy. But who would have predicted what all that stuff happened to you guys throughout the race? You just can't script it, can you?
Oh no, absolutely not. I think if you did script it, it'd be thrown out the window for being a bit too over the top.
Bit
And like,
far-fetched, yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so we go from the Enduro K being massive endurance races, long periods of time, a fairly underrated series. I think you'd say in terms of supporters, like we were discussing earlier, to now the mini challenge, which is massively popular. It's live on ITV4, um, but they're very high intense races. They go very quickly. I guess it's similar to the KAs, but you're always battling someone, aren't you? But
Yeah,
you made was it last year you made your debut in the JCWs?
it was. Yeah, so Brands Hatch last year, and yeah, it was a baptism of fire. Let's say that.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Obviously, sort of a bit of a difficult start for you though, but I think a lot of people would agree the JCWs is a massively difficult championship, partly because of how competitive it is, but there's so much that can go wrong. Talk us through sort of that first weekend. Was it a big jump up from what you sort of previously done?
Oh, massively. I mean, apart from the KAs and the Mazdas, I'd had one weekend in a Ginetta G40 Cup at Snetterton. So nothing really that was powerful and front wheel drive, unless I'd driven one on an event. Because at Palm Sport we used to have the Clio Cup cars. So I was like,
Yeah.
well, I'll probably get my head around it. And
Hmm.
I was like, right, we'll jump in. I had a test at Silverstone for the last year's media day. And I thought, this is all right. Like, it wasn't too bad. It took a bit getting used to.
Hmm.
But looking back at it, it's honestly one of the hardest cars I've ever had to get used to, because
Yeah.
it's not a Mini Cooper.
Hmm.
It looks like one, but don't be fooled. These things are, it's basically a mini touring car.
Hmm.
It looks like a Mini on the outside, but it's so completely different. Like, it's, the engine's bespoke. It's got a sequential gearbox. It's got a proper limited slip differential in it. So they take a lot of getting used to drive properly and drive hard, which is why I think you see, the guys that are really good and have done it for a long time, you can tell. Whereas when you come into it and you're a bit fresh, it takes a little while to get on top of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. Sort of, I've interviewed quite a lot of the JCW drivers. I'm a big fan of the
Yeah,
championship. I like speaking to them, and I think every single one I've interviewed have all said how difficult the cars are to drive, especially to start with. And you sort of you made the comparison to the Clio Cup, which is sort of what the Minis replaced, but an entirely different learning curve. And like you say, I think some people are perhaps a little bit fooled by their bodywork on the outside because it's a completely different beast, isn't it?
yeah. Well, let's not forget, up until last year when BTCC went hybrid, at places like Brands Hatch and Knock Hill, the Mini JCW was sometimes barely 2 seconds a lap off of them.
Yeah.
So they're fast cars for what they are, and it's just they're all pretty much the same. Yeah, and it's just so close. I think at Silverstone last year, I think 20 cars were covered by half a second.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of intense thing with minis. You might be maybe 2 tenths off a pole, but half a tenth will move you 6 places further up the grid. It's so close, it's so close. So sometimes it's frustrating, but the field's just, yeah, everybody's the same.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as a viewer, that's great to watch. And always, those races are the highlights for me on the Toka package, whether we're watching trackside or on ITV. But I imagine you did some of the season last year, a good period of time to sort of learn heading into this season. You're doing the whole year, and you must be super excited for that.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I mean, as you're probably aware, last year wasn't the best in terms of results. So it's new team, new car, new challenger this year. So really excited to be moving to Accelerate. Obviously, several times champions of the series. They're pretty good at what they do. I had a test with them last Friday at your local track actually, which went pretty well. First time back in the car for 6 months, so I was a little bit rusty to
Yeah,
get back into it. But yeah, it was really good. Very
yeah,
very different to how things kind of experienced last year. I mean, the thing is, you normally think, well, the cars are all the same, but how teams build them and run them, it just shows you that there are little differences between them. So yes, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that this year is going to be a fairly good one. But
yeah,
obviously, there's lots of new drivers to the series. I'm not sure if all of them have been announced. So I have to be careful what I say so I don't accidentally out anyone. Um, so there's obviously quite a few returning drivers, but there's lots of new guys coming into the series as well. So, and lots of them are very fast. And from what I've seen and heard from testing so far, I think this could be one of the closest years for quite a while.
yeah. No, I'm so excited about it. Like I said, it's always one of my favorite parts of a touring car weekend. And it acts as such a great sort of series just below BTCC. You know, we've seen drivers, you know, recently Ronan Pearson, challenger last year, right up at the sharp end of the grid.
Yeah.
Now in the touring cars, it's a great, you know, way to learn. And I know a lot of people have said they're maybe even more difficult to drive than BTCC.
Yeah, well, having not driven the BTCC car, I can't say
Yeah,
personally what I think of it. But yeah, it's all totally understandable. But a lot of the skills I think you learn are transferable. You know, in terms of the mechanic side of the car, you know, it's for most of the touring car grid, they're front wheel drive, they're sequential gearboxes. Again, they've got the proper differentials. You can't see much. So I think the minis is kind of a good springboard for that. Really, I think once you get your head around the subtle differences and then or the bigger differences even, it's I think you can say the two are probably quite on par with certain aspects. But yeah, I think I can see that's a good springboard to it.
yeah, no, very much so. Well, you know, it's not too long now to round one at Donington. I'm looking forward to being there, backtrack side, and it all getting going again. And you must be
I
really
know
looking
less
forward
less than
to
a
it.
month,
It's
less than a
crazy,
month.
isn't it? It's
I know it's scary actually because I just feel like there's so much I've still got to do and try and organise because um, again, another side of motorsport is how you do stuff. Like I don't have anyone helping me.
yeah,
I don't have a manager. I don't have anything. So it's just me. You know, I'm trying to find my own sponsorship. So I have to do all my own marketing. I have to do all my own finances of planning of how all this stuff works. You know, even at race weekends, there are times I'll still be running around handing out passes to people, and
yeah,
there's a lot going on. Excuse me. So that reminder that we're less than a month away now. I'm just looking over. I can see my notepad of to do list. I'm just like, oh,
yeah.
I've got so much I still need to do.
Yeah, well, I
But
won't keep you for too much longer because, like you know, like you
no, it's
say, you
okay.
I'm sure there's lots to do, and that's the thing. That's what people don't realize. It's you know, dare I say, the driving is the easy part of the job. You know, with getting sponsors, for finance, making sure everything's all ready to go, and getting that seat is far easier said than done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, but one of my LinkedIn posts, I kind of tried to make a bit of a point of it. I'm like, I'm 95% businessman. The racing stuff is probably 5% of that. That's the fun bit that everyone sees. But what a lot of people don't see is the hours working behind the scenes, trying to put stuff together. You know, whether it's sending emails, making phone calls, um, putting together sponsorship proposals, the endless emails that you kind of have to send out to try and sell yourself to people to get some more sponsorship coming in. You know, before you realise it, it's almost a second full time job that you have to fit in around everything else. You know, as much as it's nice just to go racing and everyone sees that bit. You know, not that I'm saying, oh, woe is me. I want to do this. I choose to do this, and this is something I have to do. But sometimes it's just something I think it gets forgotten about. Oh, you just race cars. I'm like, I wish that was all I did. There's
Yeah,
so much more to it than that. You know, like this week I've been trying to sort out getting the car wrapped. So there's been a bit of back and forth to try and sort that out. And because I dabble in a little bit of graphic design as well. So I designed my car. I've had to draw that up, do all the logos, make sure just little things. Make sure they're all in the right font types and little things like that. You don't think much of it until you sat there
yeah,
and you're like, how's this taking me an hour to do this? I'm like,
yeah.
this should have been done. What am I doing?
Yeah, no, very much so. Yeah, it's mad that it's not long to go, but you know, from sort of a fan's point of view, it's nice for me for especially like the Toka package, which is you know a favourite of mine to be getting going again, and I look forward to being back at Donington Park, where hopefully it's a bit sunnier than it has been recently, and
Oh, let's hope
we
so.
can all have some good racing. But thank you so much for coming on the show for a chat. It's been great to look back on your career, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
have a look back or have a look what you got planned for this season. And I look forward to seeing you hopefully at Donington Park in the paddock. And yeah, it should be a good one.
Sounds good. Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been nice to have a little chat and obviously meet you properly. And then hopefully at Donington, you have to come along by the awning, say hello, pop your head in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to seeing the new car for this season and the new livery. It should be good.
She'll stand out.
That's the best
there
thing
is
about
there
them. It's just like it's
there is a
so colourful.
there's a bit of a sneak peek on the LinkedIn because I'm still trying to find some a little bit more sponsorship just to make things easier, and I've got some branding space available for it. So there is on LinkedIn a sneak peek of what the car's going to look like. It's changed a little bit in the last few days, but not by much. So hopefully it should still stand out quite a lot.
Oh, well, I look forward to seeing it, and yeah, looking forward to seeing it at Donington. So yeah, thank you very much.
You too. No worries. You're very welcome.